Hi there. The world's quadrennial football festival is kicking off in Moscow. Over the next 32 days, 32 nations will fight to win the World Cup trophy. All eyes will be set on Luzhniki Stadium to watch the opening ceremony and opening game between Russia and Saudi Arabia. What are the big headlines around the World Cup this year? How will Russia welcome fans from all over the world? And can Russia improve its relations with Western countries through this feast of football? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined here by Paul Dong, co-founder and CEO of A China Limited, and Robin Simons, chairman of China Club Football FC. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. So guys, what do you think are the major headlines that we're going to find very fascinating throughout the process of 32 days?
I would take the very last minute replacement of the Spanish head coach or manager as just a distraction, because the main focus will still be on the opening ceremony and also how Russia, not only the team versus Saudi Arabia, but also the entire atmosphere inside and outside of the stadium, or what will happen on the street. It's interesting because a lot of things have happened, not only to the football world after Russia won the bid, but outside of sports.
Russians always generate headlines today. So after the devastating defeat of Saudis in the proxy war in Syria, the war-torn country in the Middle East, do you think Russian football hooligans will give them another lesson in the streets of Moscow?
I don't think so. I think it happens in all these major tournaments, be it the World Cup or the Olympics. Once the sport starts, the focus goes on to the sport. So obviously it doesn't solve any of the political issues, but I think they do get put to the side, and everyone now concentrates on celebrating the beautiful game.
Paul says that the dismissal of the Major General of the Spanish football team came across as a major front page story. But what about the three countries of NAFTA, Canada, United States and Mexico, winning the vote to host the 2026 football World Cup? What do you think of that piece of story?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big piece of news. It obviously sets the agenda now for the coming decade in world football. I think it was a result that was widely predicted by many people. Mexico, Canada and the USA have wonderful infrastructure, very little new development required to deliver the event. And of course, the World Cup will extend to 48 teams. So that's a huge undertaking for any country. So I think, you know, the vote's in, they've won it, the United 26 bid has won. I do feel for Morocco that's the fifth time that they've applied for the event and the fifth time they've failed. I think at some point it needs to go back to Africa, but very much to be expected.
To my poor knowledge about the FIFA football, Americans never made their way to the finals, and yet the country that drives the world increasingly mad for whatever reasons would host 60% of all the matches by the year 2026. Why do you think American football fans also bought most of the tickets in this FIFA World Cup 2018 in Russia?
But let me remind you that back in 1994, America already hosted a fantastic edition of the World Cup. And although the United States football or soccer team didn't live up to the expectations that the people, our fans in America, on basketball or some other sports, they are frequent visitors or participants in the World Cup.
The way we went big in
ping
pong diplomacy or table tennis matches.
The American team are not as weak as some people may think. Actually, they have qualified for the World Cup much more often than countries like China. And yeah, it's a great experiment. Well, it's a brave idea to allow such a huge country, and together with another huge country as Canada, and another neighbor to the south, that's Mexico, to co-host a tournament, because that will be a very diverse landscape. It's different from Russia, although Russia is a large land. But Russia was bidding for this World Cup as a European country, and most of the cities are within the European territory, so it's pretty much condensed. But for America, Canada, and Mexico to co-host the World Cup, and that will mean teams have to try travel very, very far from one place to another, and that's a big challenge.
And fatigue will be a major issue for parties concerned. So, Ruben, we don't know whether we're going to get off to a lackluster performance of the Russians on day one of the FIFA tournament, but let's discuss something very bad, something very sad. Some hopeful teams have been dismissed too early, such as Italians. I mean, why? People have been wondering, licking wounds as to why Italians have been dismissed from this feast.
You know, yeah, the European qualification, I think, is the toughest of all the regions in the world, so no one is really guaranteed a way through. I think, Italian football domestically has been struggling in recent years, and sometimes in football you get waves of generations. I think Holland would be another example of a great World Cup team that hasn't made it this year. So maybe it's a combination of lackluster performances at home, plus some people missing in a generation that hasn't generated real stars. I mean, it's a great shame to see that Italy and Holland and these countries aren't there. But of course, they're out. It produces opportunities for new countries to have a go. So I think that's the beauty of the game of football. No one can be guaranteed to win, and Italy lost on merit.
One popular CCTV moderator, Mr. Bai Yan-song, he generates a lot of news stories today. He said all Chinese resources may have been to Moscow except for the Chinese football team. Again, that's an issue that would trigger tears from the Chinese football fans. What do you think of the extremely appalling underperformance of the Chinese national team? And do you think after years of a loyal following their performances, for example, do you think they have made any progress, the Chinese footballers?
Very honestly speaking, I don't see any strong evidence that they are progressing, but we still carry on the patience, and we believe in their future. I think China is gradually moving on the right path. There are still some mistakes being made, but generally speaking, what we need to solve, I mean, the biggest problem is still try to get as many more kids to start playing football instead of, football doesn't progress or make any real progress based on the large fan base of how many people actually watch football, but it's based on how many people play. And the Chinese national team, based on statistics put together by the Economist magazine, that the Chinese national team has basically been overperforming based on, the number of people actually are playing football in China.
In sharp contrast with the underperformance of Germans, given their football culture.
Although they have won the World Cup 4 times, they still have great potential.
Ruben, what have you done with the establishment of this football club for the kids in China?
Yeah.
You've done a great job, by the way.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it does strike me, isn't it? I think probably the three of us have been around for over a decade, and I think the message that I certainly bring...
It's a tearful journey.
Every time.
Is to hopefully see the rise of Chinese football.
Yeah, grassroots is where the future lies. I mean, since the last World Cup, we've had reforms in China, very big reforms in football, which has taken the game into schools, so many more kids are getting exposed to the game. We're still missing the football culture. The people like yourself to get off the couch, come down and support the game at the local level. This is still a big problem for China. But surely China loves the game, there's no doubt. As you say, lots of Chinese will be travelling to Russia this time. I'm sure the TV sets will be full, all the bars will be full of people watching games. So, I mean, China absolutely loves the game. Still needs to go back to the same basics of falling in love with the game as kids and participating in it and supporting the game at a local level.
It takes us hours and hours to clarify and figure out why China has underperformed in the football pitch. But let's look at the opening ceremony of Russia FIFA 2018. Given the lingering impact of Crimea, that's a geopolitical event that led to the boycott and economic sanctions imposed by European Union and the United States. Also, as a result of the assassination attempt of Sergei Skripal and his daughter, many European politicians refused to attend the opening ceremony. as part of the boycott. But noteworthy, I'm afraid, for the Chinese is the absence of President Xi Jinping, who is a big fan of football matches, and he is absent from the opening ceremony. Do you think it's partly because of the absence of Chinese football team? He is very sad. He cannot afford to see the absence of Chinese players.
I think normally state leaders will show up to support their own team, representing the country participating in this tournament. So there is no real excuse for the Chinese president to appear in Moscow. And
but he did appear in Sochi for the Winter Olympics in Russia last time.
Well, it depends on how busy his existing.
Of course, he's got a very busy agenda.
And Mr. Xi didn't go to Rio to attend the opening ceremony for the Olympics, although China was sending a very strong delegation.
But he did launch a high-handed, very severe anti-graft campaign to clean the house for the football players. So do you think the campaign proves very effective? To what degree do you think that has paved the way for the rise of China's footballers?
And the reform plan that he brought in 2013-2014 is an absolutely wonderful document. I can say, personally I was jumping for joy when I saw it. It's a 50-point plan that looks at the long-term development of football. And President Xi knows football very, very well. And he was extremely clear about what China needed to do, and it's what we've just been saying. Grassroots. We need society to be involved. The separation of the CFA from government to being an independent social institute or social association. These are very, very important messages. And I think what we've seen in the last years is that maybe his policies have been misinterpreted in some way, and people have seen it as an opportunity perhaps to make money, to make short-term political gains. But President Xi is extremely clear that this is a long-term plan, and it really does start with the people being involved. Football's known as the people's game, and I think that's very much at the heart of what his reforms say. I certainly welcome those.
You're not diplomats, and neither are you prophets about how far China will go to make it to the finals of the World FIFA tournament. But let's look at the huge expense for organizing and hosting FIFA tournament in whatever host countries. Do you think this will be a victory for President Putin, who's hungry for PR success after being boycotted and sanctioned by the Americans and the European Union? How expensive is the organization work, and what do you think of this?
Some of the latest round of conflicts or controversies involving Russia and the West happened after Russia had already won the bid to host the World Cup, and even after Sochi Winter Olympics. Sochi was already proclaimed a great success, but very soon after that, doping scandals were exposed. So I think overall, back then when Russia decided to bid for the Winter Olympics and the World Cup, they absolutely decided it would be a great booster for their national pride and international image of Russia. And based on an opinion poll done 3 years ago, the majority of the Russian people believed, overwhelming majority believed, they were great success to improve Russia's international image. And I don't think there is some doubt or certain elements increased on the doubting side. But when it comes to economic benefit, it's highly divided among the people, even economists, estimating how positive hosting such a tournament will be playing on the economy.
What do you think of the costs for such a major sports event?
Yeah, there's no doubt that this is an issue every time. It was in Beijing in 2008, and questions have to be asked about the utilization rate of the bird's nest, for example. So I think these issues always exist. I do think world attention refocuses on the football when the competition starts. Personally, I think we don't know a lot about Russia. It's a huge country, a very, very diverse nation across, I think, 11 time zones. So the World Cup really is a good opportunity for us to learn more about Russian culture and Russian people. I think that opportunity should be welcomed. The cost we have to see. Every single Olympic or World Cup bid in its plan talks about legacy and talks about the reutilization of these stadiums post-games. So we still need to see whether or not that happens, but it is certainly a very expensive undertaking.
Chancellor Angela Merkel did join the European crusade against the assassination attempt of the father and the daughter of last year, but she said she would probably travel to Russia and attend one of the matches there. Do you think that's an old topic, as we have discussed many times here on our program, politicizing sports events? So what are your opinions about this very controversial issue? I mean, from a ping-pong diplomacy in 1971, which helped open the gate between the United States and China at the height of the Cold War, to boycotting the Olympic Games in the Soviet Union, you raised a number of examples to illustrate the close relationship between politics and sports. This time around, do you think Russia falls victim to politics once again?
Well, we cannot forget that football and almost all of the, or most of the Olympic sports were created by the Western world in modern history. And they have been, I mean, politics, various sports have been living together side by side over the decades or over a century. So we don't necessarily have to make a fuss if politicians are using some recent controversies to point fingers at a hosting nation or try to rearrange his or her agenda, whether to attend or skip it. But I think, don't forget, football or the World Cup is a highly commercial event, and it makes the biggest income by selling TV rights. That means people around the world, audiences around the world, pay 99% of their attention on the games being played there. So whatever you do outside of the stadium may fail to catch the attention of the popular people.
Oh, by the way, there's no doubt that Chinese football fans are zealous. They have great passion for the best showpiece, the showpiece, FIFA. What's the time difference between Russia and China? Or those poor guys, the Chinese fans, would have to stay a week and watch the football?
Moscow time is 6
5
hours.
or 6 hours?
6 hours.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and you will very soon see the first round of group matches, one involving Australia, is being lifted very early to entertain the Australian audience. It will be 6 p.m. Beijing time. Otherwise, it will be too late.
There's no doubt that the Aussies will be brought to their feet due to the excitement of the performance. But what about the cops in Beijing? They vow to crack down on drink and drive problems because, you know, a lot of the fans would drink beer in large groups to enjoy the charm and excitement of the football itself. That's indeed a warning, early warning. Let's go back to, okay, you're watching Dialogue with Paul Dong and Roland Simon. We're discussing what's going to happen in the FIFA football match in Russia 2018. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Which teams will be among the 16 teams, and which one is the best among the 8 seeded ones? Paul?
I think all the seeded teams will qualify into the next round without any problem. Although there are a lot of unexpected happening, taking place, results taking place in football, which is the beauty of this game. But in this edition, I don't see any trouble with the seeded teams.
Beauty and outrage, these are the hallmarks of a football match. So what do you think, which team will be most hopeful, will be most promising among the seeded ones?
Well, if you look at the press coverage and sort of expert predictions around the world, it seems to be very clear that Germany is seen as the major favourite. Very, very rare for a South American team to win on European soil, but I think Argentina look quite strong. I think France also have a team that can do something. We can't write off Spain, even though they've had the sacking of their manager. That's a very strong team. So I think those normal countries that we see at the top of the game are all looking to be quite favourites. I'm sure there will be an upset. There has to be in this type of a format where you have 3 group games. One of those games can easily throw up a black horse, a dark horse. I think maybe one of the African teams could go further than we're expected, and maybe even a couple of the European teams. And there I would have to mention England as well. England is not one of the favourites, not one of the seeded teams. but we have a very young team playing without a lot of the pressure that's affected us in the past. So I think probably it's harder to predict who will do well in this season, but in the end, if you look at statistics, you come back to Germany as a clear favourite.
Yes, of course, the Germans always emerge as one of the strongest teams. However, it would be a mission impossible, isn't it, for the defending champion to win yet another in quick succession after defeating Brazil 4 years ago, Argentina 4 years ago. What do you think of the chance? Or are we going to see a miracle?
There are a lot of past records, but records are left for people to break, all right? And in the past, as Rowan said, only Brazil achieved an away win in Europe, in Sweden, many decades ago, to be the only Latin American team to win in Europe. And 4 years ago, it was Germany who achieved that mission, almost impossible for a European team to win in Latin America. But this time around, I think people, because the world is getting smaller now, it's different from many decades ago, and so many Latin American players, those stars have been playing in Europe all year round. So this is no longer a very big issue or obstacle for a Latin American team to win. I think it's interesting this time around, different from 4 years ago, that in this age of artificial intelligence and big data, a lot of people are using the statistics to figure out with their own algorithm to figure out a model and to predict who will actually win. And so far, I think Germany and Brazil are among the front runners. But I think there is also a great chance for AI to lose this time, in their predictions.
There's no question about the teamwork. However, what about the performance of the superstars like Neymar and Cristiano Ronaldo, C-Ro in Chinese? So what do you think of the expectations for the marvelous, amazing performances of the superstars? Do you think the whole tournament will just be a show of these few people?
I don't think that's the case, no. I mean, obviously everyone wants to see how those great performers do in the World Cup, but a World Cup is very different from other football competitions. It's a tournament. This is 1 month when you're really isolated away, and so tournament play is quite different. Certainly, I don't think we'll see a Maradona-type performance where he almost single-handedly won the World Cup. I don't see that happening.
With the help of the hand of God?
With the help of the hand of God. So I think it's much more of a team effort in the World Cup because it's such a long tournament. So for sure, everyone's going to be looking out for those great individuals, and we have Messi and Ronaldo in those two players, two of unarguably the best players of this generation, neither of whom have won the World Cup, and I think both of those players really need the World Cup victory to cement their legendary status in the game. So it's going to be fascinating to see if either of those two can come back with a medal, but much more about the team performance. And I think that's again why Germany is seen as a favourite, because they are a unified team and work together well as a unit, and that's very important.
And don't forget, in the history of football, there are many legends of that weight, like Di Stefano and Marco van Basten, and many of them are Platini, and those are
Cruyff.
Yeah, Cruyff, and they have glorious career in their own league play, but never won a World Cup.
Why? That's the charm of football.
Because
you never predict precisely what's going to happen next. So it's just the outrage and the beauty of the football culture. So what about the individual skills of German footballers? We are talking about the organizational work, the discipline, the rational mind, whatever virtues concerning German culture. But an amateur fan of a football match like me would always be impressed by the individual skills of the Latin players. What about the European teamwork, or we see more interplay and penetrating influence for each other?
Yeah, I think in that respect, Paul's right. The world is getting smaller. So the Europeans have learned about the individual skills of the South Americans. South Americans are learning more about the teamwork. So in terms of the technical proficiency, I think most of the top players are on a par with each other. But in the World Cup, also knockout matches for the later stages, so you are looking for that rare moment of genius, and that's something that really isn't taught, but something that's inherent and intrinsic in a player. So perhaps technicality goes out in those later stages, and you're looking for someone to do something that's completely unexpected and maybe wouldn't be trained on the practice pitch. So yeah, that's the uncertainty of football. I think to win a World Cup you probably do need an outstanding player, someone who can turn a game with individual skill. We've seen that in many previous occasions as well. So I think technically these are all professional players of the highest level. Probably not a lot of difference about them. But football culture does play a part. I mean, certainly, on the streets of Brazil, that's where the kids are learning, and there are different skills and different advantages of playing in that way. So that's the great trade-off, or the great match-up is between South American individual skills and European systems and training. So it remains to be seen, as every World Cup it does, which of those can win. Last time in Brazil we saw Germany thrash Brazil 7-1 in that semi-final, which was quite remarkable. So I think the Argentinians, the Brazilians, the Uruguayan team will have all learned a lot from that previous experience and will come with more robust defensive systems. So very interesting to see.
And your thoughts on the skills and teamwork, the European style and the Latin style? Do you think we see more similarities between the two continents?
I think in today's World Cup, for a team to advance from the group and then clear a few more hurdles, you definitely need a more balanced team. Even if you have such a talented player as Cristiano Ronaldo, if you have some very severe weaknesses in your defense line, you wouldn't be able to make that far. And so first you have to be balanced. You have to avoid very severe lapses in every position. And then when you're making into the semifinals or finals, you do need the brilliance of talented players to convert the opportunities. But first of all, this is a World Cup. You cannot allow a team to go into the tournament with some strong weaknesses. In the Premier League in England, like Arsenal, always never short of some talented players, but they also have some very weak positions that make very stupid mistakes.
Thank you so much. Whoever takes home the trophy, it is eventually the football that prevails by the end of the 32-day game, Russia 2018. Thank you so much for your participation in this meaningful dialogue. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.